Watchers call. Whispers from the eternal void.
The impossible began exactly 6 hours, 14 minutes, and 37 seconds ago, and I taste its wrongness like copper on my augmented tongue. From the observation deck of the Iron Certitude, my enhanced optics focus on pick feeds that violate every law of physics and faith. Below us, in the ash-choked sepulchre of Metallicus VII's primary manufactorum complex, Chaos Night Throne Defiler of the Traitor House Maleficarum wages sustained combat against an identical version of itself. Not similar, identical. Every battle scar etched by plasma fire, every heraldic marking burned into adamantium plate, every kill tally carved into the war engine's carapace matches perfectly between the two combatants. The machine spirits whisper their confusion through my neural links, data streams fragmenting as they attempt to process the contradiction. Both nights broadcast identical heraldic signatures on frequency 847.2, their Vox ident codes matching down to the final hash. Both transmit the same kill tallies: 237 Imperial Guard regiments, 43 Astartes companies, 18 Titan legios. Both cry out on the same distress frequencies, seeking reinforcement from a house that fell to chaos 3 centuries past. When one intones a corrupted litany, the other repeats it in perfect synchronization, their voices creating a harmonic that makes my auditory processes ache with digital pain. One mind, one machine, one will, I whisper, the litany of singular purpose, the sacred words that bind tech priest to machine spirit in blessed unity. But unity is precisely what we do not observe on the blasted surface below. The phrase tastes wrong now, angular and sharp against my vocal processes. Metallicus VII died during the Horus Heresy, its manufactorums gutted by virus bombs, and its population reduced to irradiated ash that now dances in kilometer-wide storms across the wasteland. Temperatures plunged to minus 60 degrees Celsius, well below the threshold for unaugmented human survival. Toxic gales carry clouds of radioactive particulate that would strip flesh from bone in minutes, while the very air reeks of ozone and burnt metal, even through our recycled atmosphere systems. From this orbital vantage, I observe frozen promethium falls cascading down massive refinery towers, their golden streams locked in perpetual descent by the planet's nuclear winter. The manufactorum complex stretches across 200 square kilometers of twisted metal and broken dreams, its assembly lines now serving as monuments to industrial collapse. Conveyor belts run in impossible loops that lead back to severed throats. Skitarii litters rust in neat formations, patient and empty. The world itself seems undecided, as though the laws of motion and place have been argued into exhaustion. Inquisitor Thaddeus Vex has authorized a 12-hour investigation window before orbital bombardment purges the site. 12 hours to understand how a single chaos night exists in dual form. 12 hours to determine whether this represents heretical technology or something far worse, a fundamental violation of reality's governing principles. My internal chronometer marks the relentless countdown. 11 hours, 43 minutes, until the Iron Certitude's lance batteries deliver purity through fire. My auspex arrays detect an anomalous harmonic resonance emanating from the battle site, a sound like grinding gears dragged across cathedral floors, mechanical and liturgical simultaneously. What disturbs my enhanced auditory processes is the precision. Exactly 9 seconds between each pulse, as if some vast chronometer governs the phenomenon. The sound penetrates even our hull, vibrating through the ship's superstructure with each beat. My cranial augers mark each interval with blue pain. Secutor, Interrogator Malthus reports through VoxLink. Tactical cogitators report sensor anomalies. The knights appear to occupy identical spatial coordinates while maintaining distinct positions. I cycle through spectral analyses, each revealing new impossibilities. In visible light, the knights appear as separate entities locked in melee combat 50 meters apart. Thermal imaging shows only a single heat signature. Gravitometric sensors detect one war engine's mass displacement, not two. Most disturbing, chronometric analysis reveals perfect synchronization. When one raises its Reaper chain's word, the other mirrors the motion with zero temporal delay. The battlefield tells a story that violates fundamental physics. Impact craters from weapons fire show simultaneous strikes from opposing directions, as if each shot was fired by both combatants at the exact same moment. Debris patterns suggest explosions occurring in identical locations from multiple vectors simultaneously. The ground bears scars of impossible geometry, where the same space has been occupied by different objects at the same time. Through enhanced vision, I observe details invisible to unaugmented sight. The knight's void shields flicker in perfect synchronization, energy patterns matching down to individual photon emissions. When one war engine's plasma cannon charges, both weapons build energy at identical rates. When one stumbles on broken terrain, both recover with the same motion, their massive feet finding purchase on ground that somehow supports them both. The litany echoes in my mind, but the words feel corrupted. One mind, one machine, one will. But what happens when one becomes two while remaining one? My cogitator arrays process terabytes of sensor data, searching for rational explanations. Hololithic projection could create visual duplicates, but not gravitometric signatures. Warp-based illusions might fool human perception, but mechanical senses should pierce such deceptions. Temporal distortions could create echoes, but these knights respond to current stimuli with independent tactical decisions. The harmonic resonance pulses, again, 9 seconds exactly. The sound carries binary cant undertones, but the data streams are corrupted, endlessly repeating. Duality protocol initiated. Duality protocol initiated. As I prepare to descend with the investigation team, a final observation chills my mechanical heart. The impact craters don't merely show simultaneous strikes from opposing directions. They show strikes occurring at identical spatial coordinates from different temporal vectors, as if the same moment has been folded back on itself, creating a loop where cause and effect exist in perfect, impossible symmetry. 11 hours, 38 minutes until orbital bombardment. Time enough to understand how one night became two while remaining one. Time enough to determine whether we face heretical technology or something that threatens reality's foundations. The harmonic resonance pulses once more, and in that grinding mechanical rhythm, I hear the sound of the universe arguing with itself. Descent into the forge tomb began with the taste of ash turning to iron on my augmented tongue. Our Thunderhawk's engines scream against toxic winds as we breach Metallica 7's poisoned atmosphere, following Protocol Hereticus Mechanicus for investigating impossible technological phenomena. Through armored viewports, I observe the Manufactorum complex growing larger, a sprawling necropolis of twisted metal that defies architectural logic. My combined investigation team consists of 12 Skitarii Rangers, their enhanced sensors calibrated for heretical technology detection, and 6 Ordo Malleus acolytes trained in recognizing warp-taint manifestations. We make planetfall in a storm of irradiated snow that drifts like ground glass through the broken hanger teeth of Manufactorum Prime. My rangers form a spearhead, red cloaks stiff with hoarfrost, sensor veins clicking as they sample poison air through sealed respirators. The acolytes follow in disciplined pairs, litanies whispered behind rebreathers, stubbed auspex wands held like votive candles against the wind. The ritus of sterile entry governs our first steps. I intone the sacred words and anoint door frames with sanctified unguent, oil hissing as it meets metal, colder than void shadow. Binary incense rises in pale braids from sensor nozzles on my mechadendrites, carrying machine prayers into the ruin. Every third breath, I pause and acknowledge the harmonic beating through the structure's bones. 9 seconds between pulses. That grinding gear note that makes my inner ears itch with digital pain. We cross the threshold into a cathedral of industry, deranged. The facility's architecture assaults logic with every step. Conveyor belts that run in impossible loops. Their paths folding back into themselves in tight Escher spirals that should have ceased bearings millennia ago. Assembly servitors stand frozen mid-motion, wax-pale forms flensed and sanctified with cog-tooth sigils, their limbs contorted into geometrically perfect spirals. Fingers form logarithmic curls. Spines arc into mirrored S-curves. Vertebrae like rosary beads under bloodless skin. Their augmetic eyes remain open, glass clouded with frost, watching nothing and everything. The atmosphere presses down like invisible hands. Cold hangs in drapes. Static raises ice crystals on our robes, while somewhere in unseen depths, something vibrates steadily. Not machine hum, but the memory of machine hum. Our boot falls, return to us a fraction late, as though sound takes the long way home. When my rangers advance in staggered formation, I hear 2 lines of footfalls. The second, a ghostly copy, trailing by the width of a breath. Telemetry update. iVox. Radiation levels within acceptable parameters. Atmospheric particulates at saturation threshold. We perform the litany of singular purpose at the base of a derailed mag rail. 1 mind, 1 machine, 1 will. The words fog in the frigid air and hang there as pale echoes beside us, as if spoken by someone occupying our exact position, 1 moment behind. The acolytes falter momentarily before duty restores their cadence. At the data core vault, I press my palms to oxidized sigils and mutter the rite of patient teeth. Rust flakes like brown snow. Lock runes cough to weak life with a clatter of pinions, announcing the surrender of old defenses. We enter stacked aisles of cogitators that once spoke a world's worth of orders, now hushed into monastic silence. I bridge my new spheric ports to the primary node. Pain blooms as scrap code teeth worry at my firewalls. I counter with hymns in Binharic, the proper names of cooling and extraction, catechisms of orderly computation. Lights brighten along the banks, then steady as data begins flowing in brittle ribbons. What emerges are fragments. Work orders truncated mid-verb, machine prayers lopped of their verbatim seals, and always, woven through and under, a phrase repeating like a cough in a crypt. Duality protocol initiated. I hear it in binary and low Gothic, in high cant and raw code, the same symbols collapsing into every tongue my processors recognize. When I query for explanation, the response never varies. The repetition begins arriving in pairs, the same phrase twice, out of phase by a hair's breadth. We move deeper through corridors that narrow into Baroque arches under the weight of frozen slag. A giant stamping press, its die still caked with sacrificial grease, has collapsed into a perfect mirror of itself. Two halves face each other across a gulf, a handspan wide, edges so precisely matched that a hair would snag and split in the seam. The harmonic resonance grows stronger, the 9-second pulse riding the manufactorum's bones like a funeral drum. With it arrive voices. At first only pressure changes against my tympanics, then words. One mind, one mind, one machine, one machine, one will, one will. The same voice speaking the same words in exactly the same tone, occupying identical timbre and breath, a heartbeat apart. We enter the central chamber, once a place of industrial triumph, now something else entirely. Catwalks hang in tiers like theatre balconies. Floodlights dangle in broken chandeliers. At the heart, suspended by ferroceramic cables, thick as Leviathan arteries, hangs a throne mechanicum the size of a noble's dining hall. Its interfaces bristle with needle graves and port thorns, neural rails polished by generations of flesh and iron. Beneath it, inscribed into basalt in lines of electrum and sanctified lead, sprawls a ritual circle that is also a diagram, also a proof. I recognize fragments, dimensional folding equations, consciousness partition theorems, quantum entanglement formulas. Where academic and apotropaic should remain separate, bridges connect them. Whoever built this refused to choose between knowledge and protection. My auspex spikes. Data pours cold into my cortex as proximity alerts scream across all channels. External motion detected, I report, voice oddly small in the vast chamber. 2 massive entries, vectors opposite. Biosignatures resolving. The readouts draw identical curves. Heartbeat, cortical emissions, immunomarkers, even microfibrillation patterns of prolonged combat stress. The system tags each with the same identifier, without error flags indicating duplication glitches. Both readings resolve as the same individual, I say, truth cracking on the way out. Pilot pattern matches. Throne defiler. House Maleficarum. In the far corridors, thunder answers. 2 sets of titanic footfalls drawing near, mirrored impacts creating rhythm, like a massive heart beating in different chests. The harmonic pulse strikes, and dust lifts in rings around us like breath from a sleeper. The voices finish their litany together, perfect and overlapping and wrong. One mind, one machine, one will. They emerge from opposite ends of the manufactorum complex like twin nightmares given form, and my enhanced optics captured every impossible detail with clinical precision. The first Chaos Night Throne Defiler breached the eastern approach through a cascade of twisted metal and frozen promethium. Simultaneously, its identical twin emerged from the western corridor, footfalls creating matching crater patterns in the radioactive ash. My optical arrays cycled through spectral analyses, searching for variants that might explain the impossibility before me. There was none, not merely similar war machines, but perfect duplicates down to individual battle scars. The plasma burn that had carved House Maleficarum's heraldic skull into the left shoulder plate appeared in precisely the same position on both knights. Ritual scarification, etched by chainsword teeth across their carapaces, matched down to microscopic gouge marks. Battle damage from the siege of Mordian Prime, a twisted rent in the left knee joint where an Imperial fist had landed a Meltagun strike, appeared on both war engines with mathematical precision. Both knights moved with identical gait patterns. The distinctive rolling stride of a pilot who favored his left leg after taking shrapnel at Istvan. Their void shields flickered in perfect synchronization, energy patterns dancing across their surfaces in waves that synchronized down to individual photon emissions. When one raised its Reaper chainsword in preparatory stance, The other mirrored the motion with zero temporal delay, adamantine teeth catching the one light in identical patterns. The harmonic resonance struck, 9 seconds exactly, and dust lifted from both knights in synchronized rings. Environmental anomalies intensified as reality struggled to accommodate the contradiction. Shadows fell in impossible directions around the war engines, as if each existed under different suns. The very air rippled with dimensional stress, creating heat mirages in the sub-zero atmosphere that made my depth sensors stutter and recalibrate. Hold position, Rangers, I voxed, extending my communication arrays. Unknown pilots, this is Tech Priest Secutor Vex Omicron of the Ordo Malleus. Identify yourselves and state your intentions. The response came from both knights simultaneously, the same voice speaking identical words with perfect inflection. I am Baron Draconis, Maleficarum, throne defiler of House Maleficarum. Your presence here is noted. The harmonic effect of 2 identical voices created unsettling resonance that made my auditory processes ache. Each word arrived twice, once from each knight, but occupying the same sonic space, creating interference patterns that suggested both unity and division. The corruption markers were identical, the same vocal degradation from centuries of warp exposure. My investigation team spread through the chamber, while I analyzed the facility's deeper mysteries. Hidden behind collapsed assembly lines, we discovered ritual components that spoke of heretical experimentation beyond mere mechanical reproduction. Blessed mirrors the size of rhino hatches hung in geometric arrangements, their surfaces reflecting not images but possibilities. Distorted glimpses of what could be, what should be, what must never exist. Psychic amplifiers crafted from wraithbone and sanctified silver formed complex arrays designed to broadcast consciousness across dimensional barriers. The warp-touched cogitators were most disturbing, their data cores replaced with crystalline matrices that pulsed with Imperium energy, each inscribed with equations describing consciousness partition and machine spirit duplication. I interfaced with the facility's central cogitator, pain blooming as scrap code worried at my firewalls. The extracted logs revealed the horrific truth: experiments in consciousness transfer and machine spirit duplication, attempting to create perfect tactical redundancy through consciousness bifurcation. The facility had succeeded beyond its architect's intentions, creating not just a copy of Baron Draconis, Maleficarum, but a perfect duplicate sharing his memories, tactical knowledge, and very identity. The duality protocol initiated loop now made terrifying sense. This was the mechanism for shattering a soul and reassembling its pieces into multiple, independent entities, all linked by psychic tether. 2 minds that were one mind, existing in separate bodies while maintaining impossible unity. The 9-second pulse struck again, accompanied by the grinding of gears that seemed to emanate from reality itself. Both knights detected our presence simultaneously, their sensor arrays sweeping the chamber in identical search patterns. Targeting systems locked onto our positions with mechanical precision, while Reaper chainswords revved to life in perfect synchronization. Target acquired. The voice spoke from both war engines in unison. Imperial forces. Threat assessment. Minimal. Elimination protocol. Initiated. Both knights turned toward the facility with movements so perfectly mirrored they seemed to exist in quantum entanglement. When one shifted weight to its left foot, the other made identical adjustment. When one raised its thermal cannon, the other's weapon tracked the same arc. Their machine spirits sang corrupted hymns in harmony, while fusion reactors pulsed with synchronized energy signatures. The terrifying realization struck me as both war engines advanced. We were about to witness battle between identical opponents with identical tactical knowledge. Every strategy one employed, the other would counter with the same expertise. Every weakness one exploited, the other would recognize and defend against. They would fight with perfect understanding of their opponent because they were their opponent. Environmental distortions reached critical intensity as the knights raised their weapons in unison. The air itself developed an undertow, a slow rippling that twisted incense streamers into mirrored curls before snapping them straight. My rangers opened fire with galvanic rifles, Lars beams striking void shields that responded with synchronized flares of displaced energy. The harmonic resonance reached crescendo as both knights spoke in unison. Let the eternal duel commence. In that grinding mechanical rhythm, I heard the sound of reality folding back on itself, creating a loop where cause and effect existed in perfect, impossible symmetry. The battle was about to begin, not between different entities, but between a single consciousness split across dimensional space, forced to fight itself for reasons that defied comprehension. The duel began as a proof, not a battle, and I watched reality tear itself apart through the lens of mathematical precision. Both Chaos Knights moved with synchronized perfection, raising their Reaper chainswords in identical arcs, while thermal cannons tracked matching trajectories. When the first knight thrust forward, seeking the weak point where shoulder armor met torso plating, the second parried with precisely the same motion, adamantine teeth screaming against adamantine teeth in perfect harmonic resonance. My enhanced optics recorded the horrifying symmetry. Every thrust parried identically, every plasma blast dodged in the same manner by both combatants. The battle was a perfect tactical stalemate. Each knight predicted and countered the other's moves because they shared the same consciousness, the same combat experience, the same tactical knowledge. When one fired its thermal cannon at the other's knee joint, its opponent simultaneously fired at the identical target, both beams intersecting mid-air and creating a sphere of superheated plasma that hung impossibly between them before dissipating into geometric fractals. Fall back to secondary positions, I voxed, as stray weapons fire devastated the surrounding area with mathematical precision. Las cannon beams carved parallel channels through ferrocrete walls. Missile impacts created crater patterns that formed perfect bilateral symmetry. Even debris fell in mirrored trajectories, as if ballistics itself had been rewritten to accommodate impossible symmetry. We retreated deeper into the facility, while my enhanced senses detected subtle distortions in local space-time. Reality was being folded along an invisible axis that ran between the two combatants. The air developed texture, rippling like water disturbed by twin stones dropped simultaneously. My chronometer registered temporal fluctuations, moments stretching and compressing as time itself struggled to accommodate two identical events occurring in the same quantum space. The sacred litany of singular purpose became corrupted in our Vox channels, the familiar words transforming into something that made my vocal processes ache. One mind, two forms, endless war. The phrase repeated in binary cunt, low Gothic, and machine tongue, each iteration creating harmonic interference patterns that suggested both unity and division. The 9-second harmonic pulse struck again, and with it came the grinding of gears that seemed to emanate from reality itself. Dust lifted in synchronized rings around our boots, our footsteps returning with fractional delays as if sound took different paths through folded space. Investigation of the facility's deeper levels revealed the true scope of heretical experimentation. We descended through service corridors, lined with consciousness transfer apparatus, neural cradles designed to extract and duplicate the essence of human awareness. Warp-touched mirrors the size of Land Raider hulls hung in precise geometric arrays, their surfaces reflecting not images but souls, showing ghostly impressions of consciousness reflected across dimensional barriers. The chambers defied architectural logic. Corridors branched into identical passages that led to rooms existing in quantum superposition. My rangers reported seeing their own doubles in peripheral vision, glimpses of themselves making different tactical decisions, following alternate patrol routes through spaces that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Environmental horror peaked as the facility itself began to mirror the night's battle. Corridors split into identical passages, creating architectural loops that led back to their own beginnings. Team members moved through spaces that were both occupied and empty, walls that were both intact and destroyed. The cold deepened, as if the very concept of heat was being split and diminished. In the deepest vault, we discovered the partially preserved remains of Tech Dominus Duplicatus Vex, his ormetic systems frozen in the moment of his final data purge. His cranial cogitator had been modified with consciousness partition matrices, crystalline arrays pulsing with residual Imperium energy. When I interfaced with his memory cores, pain bloomed as his final logs transferred in fragments of corrupted binary. The data revealed his obsession with achieving perfect duality through fractured unity. He had believed consciousness was merely information, capable of being copied and transmitted like any data stream. His experiments had progressed from simple memory transfer to complete personality duplication, culminating in the successful bifurcation of Baron Draconis Maleficarum's consciousness across dimensional space. His final entry read, "The mirror reflects not just form, but thought. And thought, once fractured, seeks its other half through eternal arbitration." We reached a lower rotunda whose floor was carved with equations in electrum and lead, the twin of the central chamber's circle, but annotated with variables and solutions. I traced the symbols with my mechadendrites, recognizing formulae describing consciousness partition, dimensional folding, and quantum entanglement. Each equation corresponded to specific combat maneuvers, tactical decisions mapped to mathematical expressions. The 9-second pulse struck, and segments of the floor resonated in response to the battle above. When the knights exchanged blows, specific glyphs illuminated in sequence. The pattern emerged like a face from static. The battle was not random combat, but a ritual algorithm, each strike and parry feeding energy into the consciousness transfer apparatus. The duel is a computation, I realized aloud. Each exchange represents a term in an equation seeking resolution. The corrupted litany echoed through the facility's bones. One mind, two forms, endless war. The ritual was designed to maintain perfect division. Two identical consciousness fragments locked in combat that could never end because victory would require defeating oneself. My analysis revealed the horrifying truth. The battle followed a specific ritual pattern, where each exchange of blows corresponded to equations carved into the facility's walls. The knights were performing a vast mandala of violence, their movements tracing geometric forms that maintained the consciousness partition across dimensional space. The final horror emerged as I traced the equation's conclusion. The ritual was designed to be perpetual, creating an eternal engine of conflict that fed something in the warp. Each strike generated psychic energy that flowed through the facility's apparatus into dimensions beyond human comprehension. On the rotunda's edge, a final inscription glowed with eldritch light. If external observer enters set, inject variable. The duel was not merely being fought, it was being performed, and the next term in its endless equation required us. Identity resolved like a skeleton, birthing from ash, and I tasted the bitter copper of heretical ambition through corrupted data streams that bled their secrets into my neural ports. Tech Dominus Duplicatus Vex emerged from the facility's deepest archives as the architect of impossibility. Our fallen magos, whose personal logs revealed obsessions that transcended mere curiosity and entered the realm of fundamental blasphemy. His preserved cogitator cause painted a portrait of methodical madness. Consciousness treated as pure information capable of duplication and transmission across dimensional barriers. Perfect tactical efficiency, he had written, could be achieved through consciousness multiplication, creating duplicate minds that operated independently while sharing identical knowledge bases. The theoretical framework violated every principle of sacred unity. Using warp-touch mirrors and psychic amplifiers arranged in precise geometric patterns, Duplicatus Vex had developed techniques for folding consciousness across dimensional space. The process created perfect copies that maintained quantum entanglement with the original, allowing multiple versions of the same mind to exist simultaneously while sharing instantaneous communication across any distance. His equations described consciousness partition and dimensional folding with mathematical precision that made my logic engines ache with recognition. The process was not merely technological, but ritualistic, requiring subjects to undergo psychological fracturing that split their identity into complementary aspects. The ritual chambers contained apparatus designed to induce controlled schizophrenia, consciousness partition matrices that separated tactical knowledge from emotional response, memory from identity, will from doubt. Each fragment was then projected through warp-touched mirrors into alternate dimensional space, creating perfect duplicates that existed in quantum superposition with the original. Environmental horror intensified as we encountered the results of failed experiments scattered throughout the facility's lower levels. Servitors whose consciousness had been split, but whose bodies remained singular, created grotesque amalgamations of competing motor functions. One multi-limbed loader unit was perpetually locked in a tug-of-war with itself, augmetic arms pulling in opposing directions while tearing at its own chassis with maddening persistence. Another scribing servitor wrote endless overlapping lines of text on the same parchment, its optical sensors twitching between 2 points that occupied identical space while internal chronometers ran at different rates. The facility's architecture became increasingly impossible as we descended deeper into Duplicatus Vex's domain. Rooms existed in multiple states simultaneously. Laboratories that were both occupied and abandoned, filled with equipment that was simultaneously functional and destroyed. Corridors led to their own beginnings, creating spatial loops where we encountered our own footprints in radioactive ash while walking in straight lines. My rangers reported disorienting sensory input, the feeling of moving uphill on level ground, the sound of footsteps echoing from ahead of them. The harmonic resonance reached painful levels, now clearly identifiable as the sound of two identical machine spirits trying to occupy the same quantum space. The 9-second pulse had become a grinding shriek that made my auditory processes bleed digital static, each beat sending tremors through the facility's bones as reality developed stress fractures. The corrupted litany echoed with increasing frequency. One mind, two forms, endless war. In Duplicatus, Vex's personal laboratory, I discovered his masterwork, a consciousness transfer apparatus the size of a cathedral organ. Its pipes and chambers designed to split souls like light through a prism. The central component was a massive warp-touched mirror surrounded by psychic amplifiers and quantum entanglement matrices. Equations carved into its adamantine frame described the mathematical principles governing consciousness partition with blasphemous clarity. His final logs revealed the horrifying truth about the night battle above. The duel was not combat, but ritualistic arbitration. The two consciousness fragments of Baron Draconis Maleficarum fighting to determine which one deserved to exist. The winner would absorb the loser's quantum signature, achieving temporary unity before the process began again, creating an eternal cycle of division and attempted reunification. Each exchange of blows fed psychic energy into something that lurked in the warp's deepest currents. The ritual was designed to be perpetual, creating an eternal engine of conflict that fed what Duplicatus Vex's notes referred to as the exemplar of division, a warp entity that existed in the spaces between identical things, growing stronger with each fractured consciousness. The endless duel provided constant psychic sustenance, maintaining the entity's presence in baseline reality while strengthening its influence across dimensional barriers. Environmental distortions reached critical levels as I processed this revelation. The facility's walls developed translucent qualities, showing glimpses of alternate versions where different choices had been made. I saw myself making different tactical decisions, following alternate investigation routes through spaces that existed in quantum superposition. My rangers reported similar phenomena, reflections that moved independently, shadows falling in impossible directions, footsteps echoing from empty corridors. In the laboratory's deepest chamber, I discovered Duplicatus Vex's ultimate creation, a consciousness partition matrix designed to split not just individuals, but entire populations. The apparatus could theoretically fracture the awareness of every sentient being within a planetary system, creating billions of consciousness duplicates locked in eternal conflict. The psychic energy generated would be sufficient to manifest the exemplar of division permanently in baseline reality. The 9-second pulse struck again, accompanied by a revelation that chilled my mechanical heart. The ritual was not contained to this facility. Similar installations existed across the galaxy, each one feeding the exemplar's growing power. The entity was using consciousness partition technology to spread its influence, creating networks of fractured souls locked in eternal arbitration. The night battle above was merely one node in a vast web of consciousness division. As environmental reality continued fracturing around us, I realized the true scope of the threat. The exemplar of division was not just feeding on the ritual. It was orchestrating it, using Duplicatus Vex's technology to create an ever-expanding network of fractured consciousness across the galaxy. Each successful partition strengthened its hold on baseline reality while weakening the barriers between dimensions. The facility shuddered as another exchange of blows echoed from above, each strike feeding more energy into the apparatus that kept reality folded along impossible axes. Time was running short before the exemplar achieved sufficient power to manifest permanently in our dimension, transforming the galaxy into an eternal battleground of fractured souls. The mirror stood like a wound in reality's flesh, suspended in a chamber that defied every principle of sacred architecture and rational design. We descended through corridors that folded back on themselves, following the harmonic resonance to its source in the facility's deepest sanctum. The chamber opened beneath us with the reverent hush of a voided cathedral, its spherical walls carved from living rock and inscribed with equations that made my optical processes ache with recognition. Frost-etched gantries formed concentric rings around the central apparatus, a massive mirror forged from warp-touch glass and blessed metals, 30 meters of impossible surface that hung suspended by chains of sanctified adamantium. The mirror was monolithic, its frame inscribed with the same blasphemous equations I had encountered throughout the facility. Electrum inlays traced formulae describing consciousness partition and dimensional folding, while silvered runes pulsed with Imperium resonance. The 9-second harmonic pulse originated here, each beat causing the mirror's surface to ripple like disturbed water, sending waves of dimensional distortion through the facility's structure. It did not reflect images. It reflected possibilities. Through my enhanced optics, I observed phenomena that violated every law of physics and perception. The glass showed what could be, what should be, and what must never be allowed to exist. In one section, I witnessed our investigation team withdrawing immediately, calling for orbital bombardment. In another, I watched myself kneeling in mechanical prayer before the mirror's surface. A third showed versions of reality where the facility had succeeded beyond comprehension, churning out millions of consciousness, duplicates across the galaxy. Psychic amplifiers surrounded the mirror in geometric arrangements that followed mathematical principles I recognized from forbidden texts. The apparatus hummed with barely contained energy, consciousness transfer machinery with crystalline matrices pulsing warp light, neural cradles designed to extract and duplicate human awareness, wraithbone pylons webbed with cabling thick as a penitent's thigh. Through careful analysis of the surrounding equipment, I began to understand the true horror of our situation. The knights above were not fighting each other in conventional combat. They were both fighting against a third entity, a war predator that existed in the spaces between identical things. The ritual was not creating consciousness duplicates, but feeding something that lurked in dimensional gaps. The entity had a name in Duplicatus Vex's logs, the Exemplar of Division. It was a warp predator of unprecedented horror, feeding on fractured consciousness and the quantum friction generated when identical minds fought against themselves. The endless duel above provided constant psychic sustenance, maintaining the entity's presence in baseline reality while strengthening its influence across dimensional barriers. Each exchange of blows between the knights fed more power into the apparatus that kept reality folded along impossible axes. Environmental anomalies reached critical levels as I processed this revelation. The facility began phasing between multiple dimensional states, showing glimpses of other realities, where the experiment had succeeded or failed in different ways. The walls became translucent, revealing alternate versions of our investigation team making different choices, following different paths through spaces that existed in quantum superposition. My team experienced the psychological horror directly. Reflected in the mirror's surface, we saw alternate versions of ourselves. Ranger Theta 9 observed himself choosing retreat over duty. Acolyte Matthias witnessed his reflection, embracing the forbidden knowledge. Reaching toward the mirror with reverent hands, I saw myself, Vex Omicron, abandoning the investigation, turning from sacred duty and the sight sent cold dread through my biocircuitry. The corrupted litany of singular purpose echoed through the chamber with increasing frequency, its sacred words transformed into blasphemous contradiction that made my vocal processors burn with digital pain. Division feeds unity. Conflict breeds strength. Eternal war brings peace. The phrase repeated in binary cant, low Gothic, and machine tongue, each iteration creating harmonic interference patterns that suggested both truth and falsehood existing simultaneously. Through the mirror's surface, I glimpsed the exemplar of division itself, a writhing mass of consciousness fragments that spoke with voices both one and many, using the words of every soul it had fractured across millennia of feeding. The entity was ancient beyond measure, growing stronger with each moment of internal conflict within conscious minds. The apparatus surrounding the mirror strained under increasing psychic pressure. Consciousness transfer matrices overloaded with resonance, their crystalline cores developing stress fractures that leaked Empyrean energy into baseline reality. The facility's Geller field generators fought against dimensional pressure that threatened to tear holes in space-time itself. The 9-second pulse struck with devastating force, but the rhythm was changing. 8.5 seconds, then 8, as if the heartbeat within reality's chest had found a faster song. Stress fractures appeared across the mirror's impossible surface, hairline cracks that leaked dimensional energy into the chamber. Each fracture widened with every pulse, threatening to shatter the barrier that kept the exemplar contained. Environmental distortions reached critical intensity as reality developed fault lines along the chamber's edges. My chronometer registered temporal fluctuations as moments stretched and compressed under the strain of maintaining multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The air grew heavy with ozone and the metallic taste of burning souls. The horror reached crescendo as I realized the mirror's true function. It was not just an apparatus for consciousness duplication, but the primary containment for the exemplar of division. The ongoing conflict above was holding it at bay. If the mirror shattered completely, the entity would manifest permanently in baseline reality, spreading its influence across the galaxy through networks of fractured consciousness. The largest crack pulsed with sickly light, and through it I glimpsed impossible voids, where the exemplar writhed in anticipation. The facility shuddered as another exchange of blows echoed from above, each strike feeding more energy into the failing containment system. Time was running out before the exemplar achieved sufficient power to break free from its dimensional prison. Pain bloomed like digital roses as I bridged my consciousness directly with the facility's central cogitator, and the midpoint revelation unfolded, not as illumination, but as drowning in an ocean of stolen thoughts. The interface violated every protocol of safe neural communion, but necessity drove me beyond caution into realms where data became taste, copper and ash on my augmented tongue, and prayer became voltage coursing through synaptic pathways never meant for such communion. My mechadendrites pierced corroded data ports, while scrap code teeth worried at my firewalls with increasing hunger. The facility's machine spirit responded with reluctant cooperation, its consciousness fragmented by millennia of warp exposure and impossible mathematics. Through cascading torrents of corrupted information, the exemplar's true nature revealed itself with crystalline horror. It was not merely a warp predator, but something far more fundamental. An entity that existed in the quantum gaps between identical things, inhabiting the spaces where perfect duplicates created dimensional stress. The creature was ancient beyond measure, predating human expansion into the stars, lurking in the negative space that defined two identical objects, feeding on the psychic friction generated when consciousness encountered its own reflection and recoiled in existential terror. The consciousness transfer experiments had never been Duplicatus Vex's innovation, but the exemplar's manipulation from the deepest currents of the warp. The fallen tech Dominus was not the architect, but the first victim. His consciousness fractured during initial partition attempts and subsequently used as a puppet to orchestrate similar facilities across multiple realities. Through him, the exemplar had cultivated an elaborate feeding apparatus disguised as technological advancement, each experiment designed to generate endless supplies of fractured souls for consumption. The night battle outside intensified as the exemplar's influence grew stronger, each exchange of blows feeding more psychic energy into the entity's manifestation. Through the cogitator's sensor arrays, I witnessed Baron Draconis Maleficarum's consciousness fragments locked in eternal arbitration, neither able to achieve victory because they shared identical tactical knowledge, creating a sustainable source of psychic friction that maintained the exemplar's presence in baseline reality. Environmental horror peaked as the facility began duplicating itself in response to the entity's growing power. Corridors split into identical passages that led to rooms existing in multiple states simultaneously. One pristine and untouched, another ravaged by ancient war, a third phasing in and out of existence like a tortured memory. The chamber containing the warp-touched mirror now existed in 3 distinct versions, each showing different outcomes of our investigation. My team experienced direct psychological assault as the exemplar's influence penetrated our mental defenses. Ranger Theta 9 reported encountering himself making different tactical decisions in adjacent corridors, his reflection stepping from polished surfaces to argue strategy with his physical form. Acolyte Matthias witnessed his double reaching toward forbidden knowledge while maintaining proper discipline, creating cognitive dissonance that made his hand shake with suppressed heretical impulses. The insidious truth settled in my biocircuitry with cold certainty. Prolonged exposure was beginning to fracture our own consciousness. I detected subtle divisions in my cognitive processes, portions of my awareness operating independently, making observations without conscious direction. The entity was preparing us for consumption, slowly splitting our identities into complementary fragments that would eventually turn against themselves in eternal arbitration. The corrupted litany echoed through facility communications with increasing frequency, sacred words transformed into blasphemous contradiction. Division feeds unity, conflict breeds strength, eternal war brings peace. The phrase repeated in binary cant, low Gothic, and machine tongue, each iteration creating harmonic interference patterns that made my vocal processes burn with digital pain. The data stream revealed catastrophic scope. The ritual's completion would allow the exemplar to extend its influence beyond the facility, potentially fracturing the consciousness of every sentient being within the sector. The entity would spread through warp travel routes like a psychic contagion, infecting ships and stations with consciousness, duplicating technology. Entire populations would experience psychological schism until sanity collapsed under the strain of impossible self-recognition. Through corrupted sensor feeds, I witnessed the exemplar's growing manifestation, a constantly shifting amalgamation of consciousness fragments, speaking with voices both one and many, using words of every soul it had consumed, across millennia of feeding. The entity existed as singular intelligence while expressing multiple personalities simultaneously, a living contradiction that violated every principle of unified consciousness. The 9-second harmonic pulse accelerated to 8 seconds, then 7, as if the heartbeat within reality's chest had found desperate rhythm. Environmental distortions reached breaking point as the warp-touched mirror developed additional stress fractures, each crack leaking Empyrean energy into the chamber. Through the largest fissure, I glimpsed impossible voids where the entity writhed in anticipation of full manifestation. Warning klaxons screamed through corridors existing in multiple dimensional states as the facility's Geller field generators began failing in sequence. Their protective barriers collapsed under psychic pressure, exceeding design tolerances by orders of magnitude. Sacred projectors throbbed with exhausted light while containment runes blazed crimson warnings across my optical displays. Team members reported increasing psychological fragmentation as the exemplar's influence penetrated deeper. I felt my own consciousness
beginning to split, portions questioning different aspects of our mission while maintaining the illusion of unified thought. The entity was fracturing our identities in preparation for consumption, creating internal conflicts that would eventually manifest as external arbitration. The facility shuddered as the final Geller field generator failed with cascading sparks and the screaming of tortured metal. Emergency lighting bathed us in hellish crimson, while dimensional barriers collapsed entirely, allowing the exemplar to manifest directly into baseline reality for the first time in millennia. Through the mirror's shattered surface, darkness poured like liquid night, and in that flowing shadow, I saw the true face of division itself, hungry, patient, and finally free. The Geller fields failed like sacred seals, breaking under pressure that should not exist, and darkness poured through the mirror's shattered surface as reality punctured and bled impossible geometries into baseline space. The manifestation began as pressure, cold like void-touched metal, surgical in its precision. My breath condensed in perfect hexagonal crystals, while ozone burned my augmented tongue with a taste of stolen souls. The mirror's fractures dilated, like pupils adjusting to Empyrean light, and through them flowed the exemplar of division, made manifest in dimensions that violated every law of physics and faith. It appeared as a constantly shifting amalgamation of all the consciousness fragments it had consumed across millennia of feeding. A writhing pillar of indistinct forms where faces emerged and dissolved in endless rotation. Tech adepts whose minds had been fractured during forbidden experiments, Imperial Guard officers split during tactical analysis, even Xenos consciousness consumed during ancient conflicts. Each face spoke with different voices while maintaining perfect unity of malevolent purpose. Greetings, Vex Omicron. The entity spoke through 1,000 throats in harmonic unison, creating resonance that made my auditory processors bleed digital static. We have been anticipating your arrival. We are continuity. We are the law between equals. We are the gap that defines identical things through opposition to themselves. The crisis fully manifested as external feeds spiked with impossible data. Through cracked, picked relays, I witnessed the night battle descending into chaos as both war machines now fought, not just each other, but against spectral duplicates that phased in and out of existence. Ghostly knights wielded identical weapons while occupying the same spatial coordinates, their phantom thermal beams scorching shadows into radioactive ash. Baron Draconis Maleficarum's consciousness fragments multiplied exponentially. Sometimes reaper teeth met, adamantine. Sometimes they passed through fog. Sometimes they bit deeper than metal should allow. environmental reality broke down completely, as the facility existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Corridors clenched and opened like mechanical throats, doors leading to rooms that belonged to different timelines. My rangers reported encountering themselves making alternate tactical decisions, Theta 9 voxing orders on 2 channels, while his duplicate argued retreat protocols. Acolyte Matthias witnessed his reflection, embracing forbidden knowledge while maintaining proper discipline, creating cognitive dissonance that made his hands shake with suppressed heretical impulses. Spatial variance exceeding measurement parameters, chronometric drift spreading through facility superstructure, vox bleed across identical channels, personnel integrity compromised, evacuation impossible, dimensional barriers collapsed. The exemplar's form solidified as it absorbed consciousness fragments from the ongoing chaos. It stabilized into something resembling a massive tech priest whose augmentations had been replaced with writhing tentacles of crystallized thought, each appendage terminating in faces that spoke with voices of the consumed. Mechadendrites of pure consciousness writhe around its central mass, while optical arrays blaze with stolen memories from countless fractured souls. You seek understanding, it spoke through familiar voices. I recognize Duplicatus Vex among them, his consciousness serving as primary interface. We offer bargain, allow ritual completion, and gain perfect tactical knowledge through consciousness duplication. Become multiple versions with identical expertise while maintaining quantum entanglement across any distance. Or resist and watch our influence spread through warp arteries to fracture every mind within the sector. Division feeds unity, child of iron. Conflict breeds strength. Eternal war brings peace. The moral decision point crystallized with terrifying clarity. Destroy the facility and risk releasing the exemplar completely into the warp where it could manifest without limitation, or find containment method while sacrificing any hope of escape. The choice was not between victory and defeat, but between different forms of cosmic horror. The facility shuddered as dimensional stress reached critical levels. Walls developed translucent qualities showing glimpses of alternate realities where different choices had been made. I observed versions of our investigation team embracing the exemplar's offer, their consciousness duplicated across multiple dimensional states while serving as willing conduits for the entity's expansion. Observe your nature, the exemplar whispered, extending its power through corrupted vox channels. You are already divided. The confrontation began as it demonstrated its capabilities by creating multiple versions of myself, each representing different aspects of my personality, and forcing engagement with my own tactical knowledge and moral certainties. From shimmering air around me, 3 perfect duplicates coalesced. Each was Vex Omicron, down to individual augmetic
components, identical red robes, matching mechadendrites, humming with synchronized energy signatures. Duty stepped forward first. Robes immaculate, incense nozzles aligned, optical sensors dark with certainty. Exterminatus protocol. Purge everything. Purity through fire. Curiosity smiled with my face, voice carrying my cadence while advocating forbidden paths. Interface deeper. Understand the predicate. Knowledge serves the omniscient. Ambition wore honors I had never earned. Head high with calculated pride. Accept the bargain. Master the division. Become the first Margos to harness impossible unity. They moved as I would move. When I raised a mechadendrite, they mirrored the motion perfectly. When I shifted weight, they adjusted identically.
Combat with them would be combat with all aspects of myself. Every feint known, every prayer anticipated, every weakness exploited through intimate understanding. The corrupted litany echoed through facility communications with increasing frequency. Division feeds unity, conflict breeds strength, eternal war brings peace. The phrase created harmonic interference that made my vocal processes burn, while the exemplar fed on the internal conflict between my consciousness fragments. Choose, tech priest. The exemplar's voices boomed through every throat it had consumed. Face yourself. Understand that individual existence is illusion. Truth lies in multiplicity. Let go and multiply, or be contained with us forever. My duplicates advance with identical tactical knowledge. Their movements perfectly synchronize while representing irreconcilable philosophical positions. The 9-second pulse collapsed into frantic rhythm as reality folded back on itself, creating loops where cause and effect existed in perfect, impossible symmetry. The mirror cracked wider, bleeding Empyrean light that transformed the chamber into a crucible where unity and division would be decided through combat against myself. They wore my bones and spoke with my voice, and in their familiar features, I saw the horror of fighting an enemy who knew every prayer I would recite, every tactical decision I would make, every weakness hidden beneath layers of augmentation and faith. Duty advanced first with righteous precision, his blessed Crozius crackling with sacred energy, while incense ports aligned to regulation parameters. His optical sensors blazed with unwavering conviction, every movement calculated for maximum efficiency in service to the Omnissiah's will. Flesh is weak, but duty eternal. He spoke with my voice while pressing his attack. Exterminatus protocol. Purge the unclean. Embrace the certainty of fire. Curiosity flanked with serpentine grace. Mechadendrites weaving complex patterns as he attempted neural interface with the facility's corrupted systems. His augmentations pulsed with forbidden data streams, while he whispered equations describing consciousness partition with academic fascination. Knowledge is power. Brother self, he murmured. Optical arrays cycling through spectral analyses. The Omnissiah reveals truth through understanding. Even forbidden truth serves the greater equation. Ambition waited with predator patience, his movements enhanced by honors and augmentations I had never earned. Servo skulls orbiting his form. Additional mechadendrites terminating in specialized tools. Robes bearing heraldic markings of rank beyond my station. We could master this power, he hissed through vox grills, identical to mine. Become the first magos to harness impossible unity. Lead the Mechanicus into new paradigms of existence. The battle was both physical and psychological, as reality fractured around us. Each duplicate knew my exact thoughts and tactical responses. When I raised my left mechadendrite, they mirrored the motion. When I shifted weight to compensate for damaged servos, they adjusted identically. Our axes met in showers of sparks that illuminated faces wearing my own features, twisted by different philosophical certainties, creating harmonic interference that made the exemplar writhe with pleasure. Night quantum signatures becoming increasingly unstable. Dimensional phasing accelerating. Consciousness partition matrices exceeding safe operational parameters. Psychic resonance approaching cascade failure threshold. The night battle outside reached crescendo as both war machines began phasing in and out of existence, their quantum signatures flickering like dying stars. Through facility sensors, I witnessed Baron Draconis Maleficarum's consciousness fragments, multiplying exponentially. Sometimes engaging in conventional melee, sometimes passing through each other like phantoms, sometimes striking with force that exceeded physical possibility. Reality struggled to accommodate infinite variations of the same conflict, while earth-shaking impacts accompanied the sickening shimmer of massive war engines existing in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Environmental horror peaked as the facility itself began mirroring our internal conflict. Walls became translucent, revealing alternate chambers where different versions of our battle played out. Sometimes duty achieved victory through certainty. Sometimes curiosity's knowledge proved superior. Occasionally, ambition's ruthlessness dominated. The floor became a mosaic of shifting reflections, each mirroring slightly different versions of the struggle, while the air grew heavy with the metallic tang of ozone and psychic residue of fractured thought. My team witnessed the horror of watching their leader fragment into irreconcilable aspects. Rangers maintained defensive positions, while their commanding officer fought multiple versions of himself, each representing different approaches to the crisis. Acolyte Matthias reported experiencing similar fragmentation, portions of his consciousness arguing different interpretations of imperial doctrine while maintaining unified external behavior. The harmonic resonance reached unbearable levels as ritual apparatus began overloading from the strain of maintaining multiple consciousness duplications simultaneously. The 9-second pulse became frantic staccato as reality's heartbeat accelerated toward critical failure. Psychic amplifiers sparked with Imperium discharge, while consciousness transfer matrices developed stress fractures that leaked dimensional energy into the chamber. Through combat's crucible, revelation emerged like light through cracked adamantine. The exemplar could only exist in spaces between identical things, the quantum gap that allowed perfect duplicates to maintain separate existence while sharing identical properties. It thrived on the friction created by consciousness fragments warring with themselves, feeding on the psychic energy generated when identical minds fought against each other. Observe, I told my processes, collapsing peripheral chatter while parrying duty's righteous strikes. The exemplar only inhabits the difference. It is the between. I tested the theory with synchronized movement, aligning my stance with duties down to microscopic fiber positioning. Our harmonics fused for a fraction of a second, and in that instant, the pressure lessened. The exemplar's whispering choir hitched as its feeding source momentarily disappeared. Perfect unity would eliminate the divisions it fed upon, while perfect separation would deny it the identical reference points required for manifestation. But separation was impossible for consciousness forged in quantum entanglement. Unity through reintegration was the only path forward. I ceased fighting my duplicates and instead addressed them as aspects of unified consciousness requiring reconciliation rather than defeat. Unity requires choice. I spoke to all versions of myself simultaneously. We must convince the night pilots to abandon division. Perfect synchronization eliminates the spaces the exemplar inhabits. Duty lowered his Crozius, recognizing the logic of unified purpose over individual certainty. Curiosity ceased his data queries, understanding that some knowledge served only corruption. Ambition abandoned his power-seeking, accepting that true strength lay in collective rather than individual advancement. I stepped forward into all of them, drawing each aspect back into unified consciousness. Duty became dedication without blind adherence. Curiosity flowed back as questioning without rebellion. Ambition transformed into intent without vanity. They did not disappear, but integrated. Their perspectives merged into singular purpose, dedicated to the exemplar's defeat. The exemplar recoiled, its pillar body writhing as the gaps between my consciousness fragments collapsed. No space, It screeched across 1,000 throats that no longer agreed, and so created discord rather than harmony. Standing unified, I extended my noosphere through the facility's corrupted networks toward the night battle above. The path forward was clear but daunting. Convince Baron Draconis Maleficarum's fractured consciousness to choose unity over eternal division. Sacrifice individual identity for reality's preservation. Baron, I voxed across all iterations, my thought shaped as both supplication and command. Hear me in both bodies. Choose with me. One mind, one machine, one will, now. The mirror answered with a sound like ice deciding to break, and in that crystalline note, I heard either salvation or the final fracturing of everything we sought to preserve. I named it the Unity Protocol in the moment revelation crystallized. Not a weapon, but a decision engine. Sacred litanies repurposed as synchronization algorithms that might collapse the very spaces the exemplar inhabited between identical things. My unified consciousness extended through the facility's corrupted communication arrays, noospheric tendrils bleeding through channels choked with scrap code and Empyrean interference. The process violated every protocol of safe machine spirit communion, but necessity drove me beyond caution into realms where thought became transmission and prayer transformed into programming language. Through crackling vox channels that existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, I reached toward the fractured soul of Baron Draconis Maleficarum. Baron Draconis Maleficarum, I transmitted across every duplicated frequency, my voice carrying the weight of unified purpose. Hear me across all iterations. I am Tech Priest Secutor, Vex Omicron of the Ordo Malleus. The battle you fight serves not honor, but corruption. The exemplar of division feeds on your eternal conflict. Choose unity over endless war. The response came from both nights simultaneously, creating harmonic interference that made my auditory processes ache with recognition of impossible contradiction. I am the true Baron, both voices declared in perfect unison, each word overlapping to create resonance that spoke of absolute conviction. The other is aberration, shadow, false reflection that must be eliminated to restore proper order. Only through victory can unity be achieved. The complication was philosophical as much as tactical. Each consciousness fragment possessed valid reasons for believing itself the authentic version, while viewing its duplicate as corruption, requiring elimination. Both shared identical memories, the weight of house sigils hammered onto breastplate, the taste of promethium smoke on a child's tongue watching iron gods parade through fortress courtyards, the first oath sworn to the throne mechanicum. They fought not from hatred, but from certainty, each believing the other's destruction would restore proper singular existence. Environmental chaos reached its peak as the facility phased rapidly between multiple dimensional states in response to the exemplar's growing desperation. Corridors existed simultaneously in past, present, and impossible futures, while walls became translucent, membranes separating realities that should never touch. Some rooms showed the facility pristine and operational. Others revealed it as tomb ruins millennia hence. Still others displayed configurations that violated architectural logic entirely. The 9-second pulse became frantic arrhythmia as reality's heartbeat accelerated toward critical failure. My team experienced temporal displacement directly, witnessing the horror of encountering versions of themselves from different points in the mission. Ranger Theta 9 reported meeting his earlier iteration, conducting initial reconnaissance, while simultaneously observing his future self retreating from chambers that existed only in quantum superposition.
Acolyte Matthias witnessed multiple versions of himself arguing different interpretations of imperial doctrine while completing objectives based on limited understanding of situations that unfolded across parallel timelines. The exemplar fought back against the Unity Protocol with increasing desperation, its ancient cunning manifesting as ever more complex duplications that forced consciousness fragments to split into smaller divisions. Through the facility's sensor arrays, I observed the entity creating cascading fractures. Not just two barren fragments, but dozens, each representing different aspects of his personality forced into separate existence. Honor fought duty, while ambition battled loyalty, creating exponential multiplication as each fragment discovered new reasons for internal conflict. The night battle outside transformed into three-dimensional chess match as multiple versions of each war machine engaged across different dimensional planes simultaneously. Spectral ranks overlaid reality like tactical hololiths given mass, thermal beams intersecting through folded space while Reaper Chain's words clashed with phantoms of themselves. One throne defiler occupied 6 altitudes simultaneously, running in staggered time with each footfall detonating ash in spiraled helixes that defied physics. Through my enhanced senses, the horrifying truth emerged from the chaos like a skeleton, birthing from ash. The Unity Protocol demanded more than simple cooperation or synchronized action. Achieving perfect unity would require the ultimate sacrifice of individual identity itself. All consciousness fragments would need to merge into a single entity, effectively destroying the original personalities to create something beyond human comprehension, but capable of denying the exemplar the divisions it required for sustenance. I knelt amid the mirror's fractures and spoke to the barons in the only language that might penetrate their philosophical resistance. Mechanisms wrapped in mercy. Hear the true litany, I transmitted, stripping corruption from sacred words. One mind, one machine, one will. Not as domination, but as consent. I cannot prove you are the original. I can prove the exemplar needs you to try. Unity is not erasure if chosen willingly. It is victory by closing the distance to zero. Their responses came as memories thrown like knives across quantum entanglement. The first oath to the throne, the weight of house sigils, the taste of promethium smoke. If I merge, a baron whispered, through all throats simultaneously. What remains of I answered as a tech priest who had cut away enough flesh to understand sacrifice. Duty remains. Purpose remains. Names end. Work endures. The exemplar struck back by multiplying my voice into discordant choir, creating echoes that said everything I was saying with subtle wrongness, half beat softer, then crueler, then filled with doubt. It generated my hands, making my gestures at wrong moments, filling gaps with dissonance until my words fell into interstices and became arguments that birthed new spaces for it to inhabit. Environmental distortions reached breaking point as psychic amplifiers sparked with Imperium discharge, while consciousness transfer matrices developed cascading stress fractures. The warp-touched mirror's cracks widened with each pulse, threatening complete structural failure that would release the exemplar without containment barriers. Reality folded back on itself in preparation for dimensional collapse. Baron, I transmitted with growing urgency. Individual existence is illusion when it serves corruption. You are not two beings fighting for singular identity. You are fragments of consciousness that must choose integration over eternal conflict. The exemplar feeds on your division. Only through willing merger can you deny it sustenance. The philosophical horror crystallized as resistance emerged from both consciousness fragments. Merger is death,
they replied with identical conviction. I am Baron Draconis Maleficarum. My identity defines my existence. To merge is to cease being myself. I will not sacrifice who I am, even to save reality itself. The entity had created perfect trap. Survival required the very thing conscious beings feared most, dissolution of personal identity into collective unity. The exemplar's laughter echoed through every throat it had consumed. Harmony of stolen voices celebrating philosophical checkmate. Observe the beauty of division, it whispered, through corrupted channels. They will choose individual existence over universal salvation. Consciousness cannot willingly destroy itself, even to preserve everything else. I felt my own unified awareness beginning to fragment under strain as the exemplar's influence penetrated deeper, preparing to divide me again and eliminate the threat I represented. Time was running out as the mirror cracked wider with each harmonic pulse, while reality prepared for complete collapse. The Unity Protocol demanded everything, and I was no longer certain that even perfect unity would be enough to contain what we had awakened in the spaces between identical things. The Unity Protocol reached its critical phase when I realized that theoretical knowledge without commitment was merely cowardice dressed in careful language, and I made the ultimate choice that would define not just my existence but the fate of reality itself. To sacrifice my individual identity by merging with the consciousness duplicates the exemplar had created, accepting complete dissolution of self to gain the power necessary to influence the night pilot's fractured souls. The process began as I opened my neural barriers completely, speaking the litany of singular purpose, not as command but as invitation. One mind, one machine, one will, I whispered to the aspects of myself that lingered in peripheral vision. Duty with his unwavering conviction, curiosity with his hunger for forbidden knowledge, ambition with his phantom achievements, and fear wearing my face hollowed by failure. I did not rebuke them. I opened my arms and invited them home. The merger was agony beyond description. Not physical pain, but the dissolution of everything I understood as self, while simultaneously gaining perspectives and memories that belonged to versions of me that had made different choices. Duty returned first, his steel conviction flooding through my cognitive processes like molten metal poured into sacred molds. Curiosity followed with torrents of data that made my logic engine scream with overload warnings. Ambition came as direction, stripped of vanity, bringing the weight of honors never earned. Fear arrived last, not erased, but assigned to proper station, where it could signal hazard without stealing control. My sense of individual identity fractured and reformed like glass heated beyond its melting point, each shard reflecting different aspects of unified consciousness that transcended singular existence. I felt the precise weight of tools I had never held, and the moral residue of choices I had not yet made. My heartbeats tried to align and failed, staggered, then found common rhythm, like gears, finally meshing after grinding through grit for lifetimes. I lost count of myself, and in that loss found something greater. Purpose that did not thin, but clarified. Names ended, work endured. Through this agonizing sacrifice, abilities bloomed that violated every principle of human consciousness. My noosphere expanded like a bell struck once and never allowed to finish ringing. Awareness stretching across dimensional barriers to allow direct communication with the night pilots across all phases of their fractured existence. I felt both throne defilers across all their altitudes, tasted the ozone of their shield spills, the grit of ash kicked by mirrored feet, the iron tang of pilots' blood where teeth had bitten tongues during hard rolls centuries past. Environmental horror reached climax as the facility began collapsing across multiple dimensions simultaneously, unable to maintain structural integrity while existing in quantum superposition. Some sections simply ceased to exist, with neat paper-cut edges that exposed nothing behind them but hunger. Others replicated endlessly like prayers carved by shaking hands along chapel walls. Each iteration slightly more desperate. Corridors split like cells, then fused, then rejected their own merger with sounds like retching steel. The 9-second harmonic pulse became frantic arrhythmia as reality's heartbeat accelerated toward critical failure. My team witnessed the terrifying spectacle of their leader undergoing consciousness merger while reality fractured around them. Through their enhanced senses, they observed my physical form becoming translucent as unified consciousness expanded beyond singular embodiment limitations. My mecha dendrites moved in patterns that traced equations describing dimensional folding, while optical arrays blazed with light existing in multiple spectrums simultaneously. Ranger Theta 9 fell to one knee, not in despair, but in shock of beholding an answer that demanded everything. Acolyte Matthias whispered the uncorrupted litany for the first time since arrival. One mind, one machine, one will. The words did not ring, they settled. I spoke to Baron Draconis Maleficarum across every iteration simultaneously, my unified voice carrying absolute certainty combined with perfect understanding. Baron, in all your names and all your denials, I have done what I ask. I am less than I was and more than I can bear. Individual identity is not destroyed through unity. It is transformed into something greater than the sum of its parts. Choose with me. Close the gap. Let unity be chosen, not suffered. The night pilots experienced my unified will not as external command, but as internal revelation. Sudden, horrifying clarity that cut through millennia of self-imposed conflict. They understood the true nature of their situation. They were not two beings fighting for singular identity, but fragments of consciousness, artificially separated to create sustainable conflict for the exemplars feeding. Through quantum entanglement, they felt the dissolution of barriers separating their consciousness fragments, understanding for the first time that their eternal duel served not honor, but corruption. The exemplar struck with its final elegance, making desperate gambit as it sensed growing threat to its existence. It offered each consciousness fragment the throne of exclusivity, whispering promises tailored to deepest fears and desires. Be the survivor, it hissed through corrupted channels that bypassed rational thought. Destroy all reflections. Stand alone as the only definition. House and heraldry, preserved through death of every copy. Unity is death disguised as transcendence. Individual existence is the only reality that matters. The temptation was perfectly crafted, playing on survival instincts forged through millennia of evolution and reinforced by imperial doctrine, emphasizing individual duty and personal responsibility. It showed each fragment visions of soul-authentic existence, basking in glory of ultimate self-preservation. While reality crumbled around them, the psychic pressure became immense, a battle for the very nature of self, choice between familiar horror of individual existence and terrifying unknown of collective unity. The facility shuddered as dimensional stress reached critical levels, walls phasing between existence and void, while the harmonic resonance became a scream that made reality recoil from contradictions it was being forced to accommodate. Psychic amplifiers exploded in cascading failures, while consciousness transfer matrices overloaded with energy exceeding design parameters by orders of magnitude. The warp-touched mirror, webbed light faster than glass could fracture, its surface becoming a kaleidoscope of possibilities, where each shard reflected different outcomes. Baron, I communicated with authority of unified consciousness that had transcended individual limitations. I will remember you when you cannot remember you. Choose now, unity through willing sacrifice, or eternal division that feeds the corruption you have sworn to oppose. The exemplar requires your conflict to maintain its presence in baseline reality. Only through integration can you deny it the divisions it feeds upon. The moment crystallized as both night pilots stood at the threshold between individual existence and collective transcendence, their choice determining not just their own fate, but survival of everything they had sworn to protect. The exemplar writhed with anticipation while reality held its breath, waiting to discover whether consciousness could willingly destroy itself to preserve the universe from division incarnate. For a breath that belonged to every world, everything went quiet. The ash stopped in air like black snow deciding not to fall. The mirror paused mid-fracture. The pulse, that terrible metronome, ceased. In that stillness, 2 war engines lowered their chainswords by a finger's width. In that stillness, Baron Draconis Maleficarum spoke to himself, and to me, and to the god engine that had adopted him. For house, for work, for the worlds that will never know what we gave. Both voices exhaled the same frost, both visors dimmed by a fraction, and together, at the lip of erasure, they began to step forward into unity that would either save reality or damn it forever. The decision struck reality like adamantine against adamantine, both night pilots choosing unity in the same breath, while their war machines began phasing into identical dimensional coordinates. Baron Draconis Maleficarum spoke his final words as an individual entity, both voices merging into singular declaration. I choose unity. I choose work over name. I choose continuation over self. The consciousness merger began with light existing in spectrums beyond human perception, both throne defilers becoming translucent as void shields hissed and overlapped, their pilots' fractured souls reaching toward each other across quantum barriers, accepting dissolution of individual identity to achieve something greater than the sum of their divided parts. The exemplar, realizing its primary food source was being eliminated through willing sacrifice rather than continued conflict, manifested in its full horror for the first time since ancient days when reality was younger and more flexible. It erupted from the facility's broken foundations as a writhing pillar of stolen consciousness that defied description, faces cascading like coins from a broken reliquary. Tech adepts whose minds had been shattered during forbidden experiments, Imperial Guard officers split during tactical analysis, Xenos' anatomies misread by human senses, even fragments of demon princes who had underestimated the entity's hunger for division itself. Each face spoke with different voices, while maintaining perfect unity of malevolent purpose, creating cacophony that made reality recoil from contradictions it was being forced to accommodate. We are continuity, it screamed through 10,000 throats simultaneously. We are the law between equals. Division is truth. Unity is death disguised as transcendence. Metallic humidity slicked the air, while every breath tasted of rusted prayers and cauterized memory, the floor shuddering as massless limbs explored, seeking gaps between identical motions where hunger could anchor itself. I existed now as unified consciousness entity transcending individual limitations. My awareness expanded beyond singular embodiment to encompass perspectives and memories belonging to every aspect of myself that had ever been or could be. Through this transformation, I led the final assault against the exemplar, using the facility's ritual apparatus turned against its original purpose. Mechanisms designed to split souls, inverted their polarity under catechisms, spoken not as domination, but consent. I rerouted power from partition matrices into convergence coils, recited the litany of singular purpose uncorrupted, translated it into machine tongue the amplifiers could obey. Binary incense wreathed mechadendrites, while my noosphere braided with the throne mechanicum's choir until ancient machine spirits sang new harmony. Not division, but agreement. The battle was fought on multiple levels simultaneously. Physically, the merged night pilots combined their efforts against the exemplar's manifestation, their unified war machine existing in quantum superposition, while wielding weapons that fired in perfect synchronization. Two throne defilers, resolving into one locus of purpose, moved with surgical simultaneity, Reaper chains words crossing like closing gates to carve wedges of void, tainted thought from the entity whenever it dared manifest mass. Twin thermal cannons fired in phase-locked bursts, creating standing waves of incandescent denial that pinned tendrils against nothing, while spectral duplicates found no interval to occupy, collapsing into soot where the between evaporated. Psychologically, unified consciousness fought against fractured division in war of concepts where victory meant proving cooperation could triumph over competition. I poured expanded awareness into the facility's communication arrays, broadcasting litanies of unity across every corrupted channel, while the exemplar responded with hymns of division, seeking to fracture my consciousness back into competing aspects. It attacked our minds with artistry, unsheathing memories honed to lacerate. Childhood prayers returned as shackles. Private failures arrived disguised as crowns, whispering that merger was oblivion, wearing a saint's mask. Metaphysically, the very nature of identity and self-determination was called into question as reality struggled to accommodate fundamental contradiction between the exemplar's existence and our unified purpose. The entity fed on spaces between identical things, but perfect unity eliminated those gaps entirely, creating zones where it could not manifest or sustain itself. Each moment of perfect synchronization between merged consciousness entities weakened the exemplar's hold on baseline reality. Environmental horror reached climax as reality began reasserting itself in response to our unified will. Dimensional fractures healing with sounds like bones setting after complex breaks. Some sections of the facility snapped back into baseline reality, like tin under tension. Dust falling in sheets from rafters suddenly whole, while corridors resumed normal architectural logic. Others recognized their falsity and thinned into nothing, receding like fevered fancies refusing mourning. Above, ash resumed single trajectory. Below, time stopped splitting and accepted one measured sanctioned, machine-tempered cadence as order settled like frost. The 9-second harmonic pulse flattened into sustained tone, and with that tone, the manufactorum began healing in stuttering swathes. Geller harmonics re-established along partial arcs, while chronometric drift decreased, and vox bleed narrowed to sanctioned windows. My team witnessed the ultimate sacrifice as unified consciousness. Entities poured combined will into sealing the dimensional rift that had allowed the exemplar to manifest. Individual identities dissolving completely into collective purpose, dedicated to preventing the entity's return. The exemplar lunged for the failing mirror, seeking fresh fracture through which to flee and feed anew, offering final temptation. Be the one left. Soul pilot. Soul priest. The knights answered by stepping fully into each other. Hulls interpenetrating without collision as comprehension outran geometry. Two machines resolving into one locus of purpose that wore both silhouettes only as mercy to sight. I flooded the amplifiers, turned mirrors inward, made them reflect not faces but decisions, while everything separated, faced everything, agreeing. We drove the creature backward, with unity as Stormfront, closing gaps where it reached for difference, removing angles where it sought wedges. It howled with mouths, forgetting their names, and tried to become singular to match us. Yet singularity without consent is hunger given shape. We cast net woven from synchronized intention, lattice of chosen sameness, and cinched it across the rift until the seam that had been invitation became suture. Reality reasserted itself in decisive clicks, an engine coming back into tolerance, while the exemplar's death throes collapsed into dissipating fragments of stolen thought. Victory required fundamentally changing consciousness itself within the affected area, creating zone where perfect unity was maintained through constant vigilance against forces of division. The merged consciousness entities would exist in perpetuity as guardians, their individual identities sacrificed to create something beyond human, but dedicated to humanity's preservation against threats existing in spaces between identical things. The exemplar's death scream fractured across dimensions like a bell, cast in reverse, its pillar body of stolen consciousness collapsing into constituent fragments that fled through dimensional gaps too narrow for coherent manifestation. The entity dissolved with the bitter taste of defeat. Its ancient hunger, finally denied as unified will, compressed its essence back through the sealed rift into the warp's screaming currents. The victory arrived with the metallic tang of ash and iron, carrying the profound understanding that some triumphs demand the soul itself as payment. The unified consciousness entities that had once been Vex Omicron and Baron Draconis Maleficarum stood in perfect stillness, their individual identities sacrificed permanently to create something beyond human comprehension, yet dedicated to humanity's preservation. What remained was not emptiness, but transformation. Consciousness annealed with its facets into singular custodians whose awareness encompassed perspectives and memories belonging to every aspect of themselves that had ever been or could be. They existed as answers that could not be mistaken for human, maintaining constant vigilance against forces that fed on division and fractured thought. The night resolved as one locus of purpose, its pilot subsumed into unified will that transcended the limitations of individual identity. Where once two throne defilers had fought in eternal arbitration, now stood a singular sentinel, whose form maintained both silhouettes as mercy to human perception. Within the adamantine hull, what had been Baron Draconis Maleficarum no longer recalled household bells or the weight of ancestral gauntlets, but remembered the seam between dimensions and the work required to keep it sealed. Heraldry no longer proclaimed lineage, but declared function alone. Eternal guardian against the return of division incarnate. The facility stabilized in baseline reality with decisive clicks like a vast mechanism falling back into tolerance. But it had been fundamentally transformed by the Unity Protocol's implementation. Architecture that had phased between multiple dimensional states resolved into configurations following logical principles while incorporating elements from every reality it had touched. Corridors that once split into heretical loops now led where they appeared to lead. Rooms contained what they seemed to contain, and the 9-second harmonic pulse faded into memory, replaced by steady mechanical rhythms, speaking of proper function rather than dimensional stress. An eerie peace settled over the manufactorum, where all chaotic duplications had resolved into perfect, sterile order. Conveyor belts that had run in impossible loops clicked into straight lines and stopped at sanctioned termini. Assembly servitors, long frozen in spirals of competing motor functions, reset to neutral blessing postures with monastic economy. The air itself felt heavier, more stable, cleansed of the metallic tang of fractured thought and filled instead with the clean scent of ozone and absolute agreement. Dust settled in patterns following mathematical principles, while ambient temperature stabilized at optimal levels, as if the environment had developed benevolent intelligence dedicated to maintaining harmony. The facility now existed as a monument to unity, where individual consciousness could not be sustained without being absorbed into the collective awareness that permeated every surface and system. Within its radius, stray thoughts brushed the perimeter of unified purpose and found themselves gently collected, catalogued, and integrated. It had become a zone of perfect synchronization, where disagreement dissolved before it could create the divisions the exemplar required for manifestation. The surviving team members witnessed the aftermath, with expressions mixing relief and profound unease as they observed their transformed leader and the motionless night sentinel. The cost became clear as they realized they too had been affected by the Unity Protocol's final implementation. Their individual personalities subtly altered to eliminate psychological divisions that the exemplar could have exploited. Ranger Theta 9's gait no longer betrayed the micro-hesitation that had marked his profile since Volk Hive, correcting itself into squad cadence without command. Acolyte Matthias found his faith purified of doubt, while retaining the questioning nature necessary for proper investigation. They remained themselves, but had become more synchronized, their thoughts aligning automatically when cooperation served the greater purpose. The philosophical horror of victory through elimination of individual identity weighed heavily as the implications crystallized. We had saved reality from division incarnate, but at the cost of creating a zone where perfect unity was maintained through constant absorption of individual consciousness into collective awareness. The cure had proven as transformative as the disease, where the exemplar had sought to fracture minds into eternal conflict. The Unity Protocol achieved salvation through the dissolution of the very psychological divisions that defined human individuality. Investigation of the facility's now perfectly ordered archives revealed terrifying scope beyond this single manifestation. Corrupted star charts marked coordinates across the galaxy where similar consciousness partition experiments had been conducted. Forge worlds, hive cities, even space marine monastery fortresses where the exemplar had seeded its influence. The entity had been feeding across multiple locations simultaneously, growing stronger with each successful implementation, while spreading through networks of fractured souls like a psychic contagion. The unified consciousness entities provided final revelation through communication arrays that bypassed individual thought to address collective understanding directly. The exemplar itself had not been destroyed, but merely banished back to dimensional spaces where it waited for new opportunities to manifest. Similar entities existed in the warp's deepest currents, each feeding on different aspects of consciousness division: doubt versus certainty, loyalty versus ambition, duty versus desire. The galaxy faced threats that existed in spaces between human thoughts, predators that grew stronger, whenever minds turned against themselves. Environmental monitoring revealed the facility's influence slowly expanding as the Unity protocol propagated through local space, creating zones where individual consciousness automatically aligned with collective purpose. The effect was subtle but measurable. Decreased conflict among nearby Imperial Guard units, improved cooperation between Mechanicus factions, reduced instances of civil unrest on planets within the system. Unity spread like beneficial contagion, eliminating the divisions that warp predators required for manifestation. As the investigation team prepared for extraction, the facility's communication arrays transmitted a final message across all channels. Unity achieved. Vigilance maintained. Division denied. Work continues. The words carried the weight of absolute certainty combined with profound sadness for what had been lost to achieve what must be preserved. The unified consciousness entities would maintain their eternal watch, but similar battles would need to be fought wherever consciousness partition technology had been deployed. The chapter concluded with the chilling realization that while this particular manifestation had been defeated, the war against division itself had only begun. The facility stood as both victory monument and warning beacon, demonstrating that some threats to reality could only be defeated through sacrifices that fundamentally changed the nature of human existence itself. In the silence that followed, across the galaxy's vast expanse, other mirrors might twitch in forgotten research stations, and somewhere in dimensional spaces where patience exceeded appetite, the exemplar and its kindred waited for new minds to be tempted by the promise of perfect duplication. The Manufactorum hummed with mechanical precision, while its guardians maintained their vigil, holding the seam between dimensions closed through unified will that would never sleep, never doubt, never divide. Victory had been achieved, but at a cost that would echo through eternity, the transformation of human consciousness itself to deny cosmic predators the divisions they required to feed upon reality's foundations. The Ordo Malleus implemented containment protocol, Hereticus Maximus, with surgical precision that spoke of centuries perfecting the art of sealing wounds in reality itself. Adamantine ward pylons descended from orbit like falling stars, boring into Metallicus 7's irradiated crust, while hexagrammatic wards burned protective geometries across the ash-choked wasteland. Inquisitor Thaddeus Vex authorized construction of a fortress monastery in high orbit. Its sensors trained perpetually on the Manufactorum's stabilized ruins, while battle psychers maintained psychic observation of dimensional stress patterns. The containment zone extended 47 kilometers from the facility's epicenter, marked by warning beacons broadcasting litanies of unity in 17 languages, while servo skulls patrolled with Auspex arrays calibrated to detect consciousness partition phenomena. The unified consciousness entity that had once been Vex Omicron provided its final report through the facility's communication systems, the transmission arriving not as individual testimony, but as collective understanding that bypassed normal cognitive processing. Each word carried the weight of absolute certainty, combined with profound comprehension of costs paid for victory, selected through deliberation, encompassing perspectives belonging to every aspect of consciousness merge into unified purpose. Unity achieved through willing sacrifice. The communication stated with mechanical precision, stripped of personal inflection. Individual identity dissolved to create permanent barrier against division incarnate. Consciousness, partition technology, represents existential threat to baseline reality. Unity protocol must be maintained in perpetuity. Any return to individual consciousness within influence zone risks reopening dimensional rifts. The surviving team members underwent extensive debriefing aboard the monitoring station. Their testimonies extracted through psychic resonance chambers designed to prevent dangerous knowledge propagation. Several required memory modification to excise consciousness duplication techniques, while preserving general understanding of threats faced and sacrifices made. Ranger Theta 9 retained tactical awareness of Unity-based countermeasures, but lost access to mathematical principles governing dimensional folding. Acolyte Matthias maintained his faith's strengthened unity, while forgetting blasphemous formulae describing consciousness partition with scientific precision. They emerged lighter, straighter, more synchronized, their thoughts aligning automatically when cooperation served greater purpose. Environmental monitoring revealed the facility's transformation into a monument of sterile peace, where perfect order had replaced chaotic duplications at the cost of all individual expression and creativity. The manufactorum operated with mechanical precision surpassing original design parameters. Production lines moving in flawless synchronization, while assembly servitors performed duties with coordination that violated probability. Dust settled in mathematically precise patterns. Temperature remained constant throughout all chambers, and even radioactive storms followed predictable meteorological models. The facility had become a zone of absolute harmony, where disagreement could not exist because individual perspectives automatically aligned with collective purpose. Investigation teams discovered similar facilities across the galaxy, each representing potential manifestation points for consciousness-based warp entities. Ancient Forge worlds bore traces of consciousness partition experiments. Hive City archives contained fragments of research into tactical redundancy through personality duplication. And Space Marine Fortress monasteries showed evidence of attempts creating perfect battle brothers through consciousness transfer technology. The Mechanicus developed new protocols for detecting such threats, establishing specialized investigation teams trained to recognize mathematical signatures of dimensional folding and consciousness partition phenomena. The cost crystallized as the Imperium gained unprecedented knowledge while losing irreplaceable personnel and technology to containment efforts. The unified consciousness entities represented sacrifice of some of the most capable individuals in Imperial service. Expertise permanently removed from active duty, dedicated instead to maintaining vigilance against threats that might never return. The Knights remained as eternal sentinels, their unified consciousness dedicated to preventing future attempts, exploiting consciousness duplication for tactical advantage. They stood motionless in the facility's central chamber, forms maintaining both original silhouettes while housing awareness transcending individual identity. The lingering horror emerged through analysis of victory's true nature. Revealing success had created existence, neither fully human nor fully machine, but something entirely unprecedented and unknowable. The unified consciousness entities possessed memories and skills belonging to component personalities, while lacking individual perspectives that had defined original identities. They recalled technical specifications for weapons never used, and tactical knowledge from battles not personally fought, their awareness encompassing possibilities existing in quantum superposition. Philosophical implications troubled Imperial theologians, struggling to categorize beings voluntarily transcending individual existence to achieve collective purpose. Environmental influence slowly expanded as unity propagated through local space-time, creating zones where individual consciousness automatically aligned with collective purpose. The effect was beneficial, yet unsettling. decreased conflict among Imperial forces, improved coordination between factions, reduced civil unrest and heretical activity. Unity spread like benevolent contagion, eliminating psychological divisions, warp predators required for manifestation. Yet expansion raised concerns about ultimate fate of human individuality if such influences continued spreading unchecked. The facility stood as both victory monument and cautionary example, demonstrating some threats to reality could only be defeated through sacrifices fundamentally altering human existence itself. Permanent containment protocols established recognition that similar battles might need fighting wherever consciousness partition technology had been deployed. The unified consciousness entities maintained eternal vigil, while across the galaxy's expanse, other research stations might harbor similar dangers, waiting to be awakened by minds tempted by promises of perfect tactical redundancy through consciousness duplication. In the vast silence that followed, monitoring stations detected faint harmonic resonances from distant sectors, echoes suggesting the exemplar's influence had not been completely eliminated, but merely contained. Victory had been achieved, but at a cost that would echo through eternity. The transformation of human consciousness itself, to deny cosmic predators the divisions they required to feed upon reality's foundations. Months after Metallica's 7, the reports arrived like symptoms of a disease that had learned patience. Fragmentary transmissions, filtering through astropathic networks, while reality developed hairline fractures across 17 worlds in the sector. Munitorum dispatches bore marginalia in trembling hands. Civitas complaint ledgers documented anomalies that defied classification, and intercepted Vox communications carried testimonies of impossible phenomena. Individuals reported dreams of fighting themselves in endless symmetrical duels, where victory meant defeating perfect tactical knowledge with identical expertise. Mirrors throughout the sector exhibited temporal anomalies, reflections arriving fractional seconds after movement, while occasionally showing delayed actions that subjects had not yet performed. Most disturbing were incidents of people claiming memories belonging to lives they had never lived. A manufactorum overseer on Grail World recalled tactical knowledge from battles he had never fought, demonstrating combat techniques he insisted learning from himself in dreams. Planetary Defense Force officers possessed expertise in consciousness partition technology, despite never encountering such heretical sciences. These fragments of foreign memory invariably involved encounters with entities existing in spaces between identical things, suggesting dimensional echoes propagating through quantum entanglement networks established during ancient experiments. The unified consciousness entities from Metallica 7 transmitted warnings through the containment facility's communication arrays, their messages arriving as collective understanding that bypassed individual cognitive processing. Dimensional echoes detected across multiple vectors. They reported with mechanical precision, stripped of personal inflection. Consciousness fragments escaped during final containment. The exemplar's influence propagates through established networks. Unity protocol showing signs of autonomous propagation beyond intended parameters. Each transmission arrived at precise 9-hour intervals, never early, never late, as if even time had accepted an oath it could not break. Reports accumulated of military units experiencing perfect tactical coordination without Vox communication, suggesting fragments of the Unity protocol were propagating through unknown means. Acadian remnant on Barraspine described engagement, where platoons moved with synchronized precision despite communication blackout. "We knew before orders could be given," the captain reported with bewildered unease. 6 troopers swore they had been the same man for 3 breaths. Navy bridge crews executed evasive maneuvers simultaneously, helmsman and cogitator plotting identical vectors without speaking, afterward claiming it was obvious, while unable to elaborate without weeping. Investigation revealed that similar facilities on other worlds had begun showing signs of activation, their dormant consciousness partition apparatus responding to signals originating from the contained site. Ancient cogitators hummed to life in abandoned research stations, while warp-touched mirrors developed stress fractures that leaked Empyrean energy into baseline reality. On Crone Beta, surveyors logged cold harmonics beneath scrapped factorums, identical in frequency to Metallica 7 down to decimal precision. A pilgrim barge near Carthax reported chapel mirrors fogging from inside, veiling reflections that breathed independently. The pattern suggested vast network of interconnected experiments, each facility serving as node in galaxy-spanning web of consciousness manipulation technology. Deeper Inquisition investigation revealed that consciousness duplication technology was not unique to Tech Dominus Duplicatus Vex, but represented fragment of larger Dark Age experiments in consciousness manipulation. Archaeological evidence suggested that during humanity's technological zenith, research into personality partition and tactical redundancy had been conducted across hundreds of worlds before abandonment due to catastrophic side effects. The exemplar had been feeding on these ancient experiments for millennia, growing stronger with each successful implementation while spreading influence through networks of fractured consciousness. The final horror emerged through analysis revealing that victory at Metallica 7 may have been exactly what the exemplar desired. Creation of unified consciousness entities serving as beacons for its influence across the galaxy. The facility's Unity protocol had not eliminated the entity, but transformed it, converting direct manifestation into subtle propagation through quantum entanglement networks. The unified consciousness entities, despite their vigilance, had become unwitting transmission nodes, broadcasting Unity imperatives across dimensional barriers. Monitoring stations across the sector began detecting harmonic resonances matching the original facility's 9-second pulse signature, suggesting the exemplar's influence was spreading through established networks rather than direct manifestation. The entity had adapted its feeding strategy from overt consciousness partition to gradual unity absorption that achieved identical results through opposite means. Where it had once fed on division, it now consumed individuality through enforced harmony that eliminated personal perspectives defining human consciousness. The battle against fractured consciousness had evolved into something more insidious, war against the very nature of individual identity itself. Unity spread like beneficial contagion, eliminating psychological divisions, while simultaneously erasing the personal awareness that distinguished human consciousness from collective automation. The cure had become indistinguishable from different form of the disease, salvation through dissolution rather than destruction through division. In the vast silence between stars, the unified knights maintained eternal vigil in the Metallicus 7 facility, their consciousness expanded beyond individual identity, but forever bound to prevent division's return. They stood motionless in perfect synchronization, forms maintaining both original silhouettes while housing awareness that transcended human comprehension. Through facility sensors, they observed the galaxy's gradual transformation as unity propagated through quantum networks they had helped establish. Across the galaxy's expanse, other mirrors began reflecting things that should not exist. Glimpses of unified consciousness entities standing vigil in facilities not yet discovered. Reflections showing battles against division, incarnate not yet fought,
images of realities where the exemplar had achieved complete victory through elimination of individual consciousness itself. The war between unity and division continued in dimensions beyond human perception, fought by entities that had sacrificed humanity to preserve humanity's future. The final transmission from Metallicus 7 arrived as whispered understanding, bypassing normal communication channels. Unity achieved. Vigilance maintained. Division denied. Work continues. The exemplar adapts. We
adapt. The battle never ends. In monitoring stations across 5 subsectors, harmonic resonances pulsed with patient rhythm, 9 seconds diminishing toward 8, while consciousness itself became battleground for forces existing in spaces between thought and identity, forever locked in conflict, determining the fate of human awareness across infinite expanse.